How many are familiar with the Lightning Network in any fashion? Almost everybody. And how many run a Lightning Network node? Quite a few. At least, probably about 50%. So that's awesome. But, more would be good. How many know what an implementation is just in general in the technical sense? About the same amount, maybe a little more. And who wants to hazard a guess at how many Lightning Network implementations there are?
4.
Did I hear 4? 4, 4, 6, 6.
CTV count?
Does CTV count? No. I'm hearing 4 to 6. That's ETH does not count. 4 to 6 is that's a good guess. Definitions, I want to quickly define the difference between a protocol specification and implementation. So a protocol, who would hazard a guess at what a protocol might be?
Rules.
Rules. I like it, that's good. I just said a way of doing a thing, that's kind of like rules. Specifically when we're talking about network protocols, just to kind of stretch it out a little bit more, a standard procedure for regulating data transmission between multiple computers. All of these definitions, by the way, I kind of sort of made up with, conglomerating dictionary definitions plus kind of technical manuals, and just to make it kind of applicable, the most applicable to us tonight. What about a specification? Description, a way to measure a thing. This one I went a little bit harder on. A documented set of explicit and detailed technical requirements. So has to be written down somewhere, publicly ideally. It's detailed, meaning we know exactly this is what this is. To be satisfied by a piece of hardware or software, often for the purpose of interoperability, so that when other people are reading this thing, they can build things that agree with the specification. And when we're talking in Lightning Network terms, we're often talking about the bolt specification, or the basis of Lightning technology. And I'll put these links up at the end in the resources. And then finally, we have an implementation, which is kind of the crux here. And I put this down as the execution or practice of a specification, which we just went over. And so in software, the program, this is the code, this is the thing that's going to run on your machine that does the previously described thing. So I'm going to talk about a handful of implementations here. There's 5 on the board. There are more. So 4 to 6 was a good guess, because that's what we're covering, 4 to 6. Core Lightning, Eclair, Rust Lightning, commonly referred to as LDK, Lightning Development Kit, L&D, Lightning Network Daemon, and the Lightning Network Protocol, or LNP Core, which is a little bit of an outlier on this list, but for funsies, it's on there. So what languages are these written in? C Lightning, formerly C Lightning was, Core Lightning was formerly called C Lightning. It's written in C. Go figure. It has a plugin system. Those can be written in any language. It also has some Rust and a little bit of Python in it. Eclair is written in Scala. Rust Lightning, obviously, is written in Rust. L&D in Go, and LNP is also in Rust. There's teams associated with each of these. That doesn't mean they have ownership, or that this is exclusively their product. But typically they are the lead development team, and they are the bulk of the development. So for Core Lightning, that's Blockstream. Eclair, that's Async. Rust, or LDK, is Spiral. Lightning Labs, L&D, and the LNP-BP Association. If you're not familiar with them, they're doing killer stuff just all around. RGB mostly, but all over the place. They're doing cool stuff. The network share, how big are these? Who's using them? So Core Lightning and Eclair, this is also very hard to estimate, like a lot of things with distributed networks. So all these are super approximate numbers. Core Lightning and Eclair are coming in at the second biggest, with some amount between less than 10%. L&D is by far and away the most popular. Yeah?
Is it just percentage of nodes?
This is the way that I got these numbers was from and I actually meant to post it. There's a paper on, I can't remember the type of attack, but there was a paper written on a specific type of Lightning Network attack, and in that paper they outlined the different rule set that was being gossiped by nodes. And as a result, because each of these has slightly different default values, they can assume that if it's 80% of them are running this particular value that happens to be a default value to L&D, that's most likely what it is. So that's where these numbers come from. That adds to the approximation, but generally, a lot of people are running these with defaults. So
that actually might be skewed then if it's just their one peer on the gossip network, because the gossip doesn't go all.
Sure. Also, yeah. So again, take these numbers with a huge grain of salt. One thing that is obvious is that L&D is the runaway most popular at this time. But just to give you an idea of who's running what. Licenses, all open source across the board, which is awesome. Mostly MIT licenses. And a couple quick notes, and then we're going to dive on a couple of these. So Core Lightning, I find it super stable in my experience. It's completely modular, so it operates on a plug-in system, meaning it's like you can bolt on all kinds of stuff like a Honda Civic and just make it do what you want it to do. It's got a really some really cool tools that have been built recently by some really skilled devs. We'll get into that later. Eclair, their biggest claim to fame is that async is just a gigantic node. Like at one point it was 10% of all liquidity on the network, so it's a super scalable implementation. Anyone that's using Phoenix Wallet, you're probably using their node, or you're definitely using their node. LDK is written in Rust, that's cool. It's super flexible. If you're using Mutiny, you're using LDK. There's probably others, if anyone wants to shout them out. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I'm sure others are using LDK. L&D, definitely the most popular. A lot of firsts. They've been around a long time. I don't know if they were the first, but presumably. Implementation. They've got PTLC support, which is really cool. They're the first to do that as well. And LNP is like really cool for people that are experimenting with some kind of next-gen stuff. So I wanted to leave it on there. I also wanted to mention a couple other implementations. So this would be number 6, which is Electrum. Has anyone ever used Lightning on Electrum? More than I expected. Was your experience terrible? Mine was. Anyway, it works. It's good. It's not quite, fully featured. Node Lightning is a TypeScript implementation. LIT is another Go implementation, and Ptarmigan, which doesn't exist anymore, RIP, I guess. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, so 9 implementations, 8 if you don't include the dead one. And there are actually, I think, 1 or 2 more, so a couple more than maybe some of you might have expected. But generally, people talking about implementations are going to talk about Core Lightning or CLN and L&D. And I'm going to dive a little bit more on the features of each of those, as well as Eclair just a little bit, just because it's up there on share as well. So let's start with Core Lightning. I mentioned it has a plugin system, which has a ton of different things that you can put into it, different features that you can add. From the get-go, it's modular, which is really nice. It's lightweight and super focused on being spec compliant. Like they take that to heart, and they adhere to it really strictly. They have an authentication system called Runes. If you're familiar with L&D, those are macaroons. It's the same kind of system. Dual funded channels, which is really cool. So typically when we're opening a channel, or at least historically, we'll open a channel, it'll be one direction, and all the funds will end up in one direction. Nice thing about dual funded channels is that you can open some percentage on either side. So you can come to an agreement, say, we want this to be a 50-50, split, 60-40, whatever, and you can have a dual funded channels, which is really cool. And I think this is coming to other implementations, but to my knowledge, it's exclusive at the moment. Liquidity ads, also super cool when you're pairing that with dual funded channels, is this notion that you can advertise that I have, or I'm willing to create some liquidity with someone else according to whatever policy you set. So for example, you might say, I'll match 100% of your funds and we'll make it a 50-50 channel. So liquidity ads are really cool, and it's peer-to-peer, no third parties, no services, no cloud that you got to deal with outside of the Lightning Network. Bolt 12 offers, they've been pushing really good. So who's familiar with Bolt 12? Okay. Bolt 12 is really cool. It's like reusable QR codes, among other things. Excuse me. Also adds some privacy. definitely check out Bolt 12. I don't have time to go too far into it right now. They've got some cool privacy features like route randomization and shadow routes, which basically adds delays to kind of help obscure where your payments are coming from. So they have a little bit more focus on privacy than any of the other implementations. Multi-channel peers and multi-funded channels. So you can have multiple channels with the same peer, and you can fund multiple channels with the same transaction. So you can make a transaction and open several channels at once, which is efficient for, especially in high-fee environments. Excuse me. They have some advanced experimental stuff around multi-part payments, which would mean like, so you make a payment and then you would have it go in multiple directions. So you'd have part of the payment go here, say 40%, part of it go here. This is cool if you have like artists and you want to tip the artist plus the producer plus the record label or whatever, something like that.
MPP is usually used for if you don't have enough liquidity in one channel. Like you'll use another channel to make up for the rest of the liquidity.
Right on. So okay. So I might be confusing this with a different, maybe a different feature. Maybe. Okay. Thanks for pitching that in.
Can you repeat that for the recording?
So Hunter's mentioning that a multi-part payment is that you can use parts from another channel, liquidity parts from another channel if you're not able to make it up from the channel that you started the payment from. Is that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. And channel splicing, which is brand new, doesn't really have any UI around it, but splicing is live, which is basically the ability to, excuse me, as you could imagine, splice in to existing channels more funds so that you don't have to open new channels, for example. So you could increase the size of a channel or change the liquidity of it without submarine swaps, for example. And peer swap support. Has anybody heard of peer swap? More than I thought. Peer swap is pretty new also, but really cool distributed peer-to-peer liquidity, not liquidity, but swaps. So like submarine swaps, but without a third party.
By the way, the artist split thing you were talking about earlier, that's called Prism.
I do know Prism. Prism, I feel like also uses something else, but we'll have to chat about that later. I wanted to quickly just note a couple of plugins that are really cool. Excuse me, can someone get me like a glass of that water or something, please? I'm like dying up here. Bookkeeper is really cool. Node accounting and tracking software, like built right in if you choose to install it. Smog works with that so that you can get full tracking as a business owner of like your inflows and outflows. CL Boss, super cool, full node automation, so it can, depending on how much permission you give it, it can open channels, it can rebalance channels, and it can even close channels, although typically it's recommended not to allow that because you may or may not want it to do that, but there's a lot of fine-grained controls in CL Boss. And I have Satoshi, which is a Bolt 13 watchtower. Actually, the client, thank you so much. Actually, the client is a plugin, and the server is standalone, so technically half of that is a plugin. Let's quickly talk about Eclair. So Eclair's biggest claim to fame is that it's got a gigantic node, about 480 Bitcoin today, which is about 5% of all the liquidity on the whole network. So this is what Phoenix Wallet's using to open close channels, make payments and things like that for you. They also have a plugin system. I don't know too much about it, sorry to say. They didn't have a ton of documentation on their GitHub. They are hyper-focused on fast and reliable payments. As you can tell if you've ever used Phoenix, like that's what they're going for, especially for mobile users. They want to make it end-user friendly. And so they obviously make some trade-offs there by using their node explicitly and having some, it's non-custodial, but you don't run the node, so you don't own it. They have custodial swaps in Phoenix. I haven't never used them, but they also have multi-part payments. And I think that's it for Eclair.
Channel splicing.
They also have splicing?
They have really good channel splicing.
Very cool. So Eclair also has channel splicing. Thanks, Hunter. L&D, by far the most popular. They have the biggest community. So developers, or if you need support, L&Ds, you're going to get the fastest answers. There's going to be the most content out there, so on and so forth. Most development attention in general. as well as the biggest ecosystem. Any kind of third-party software that you're going to use, for the most part, is going to support L&D. There's a few things that are explicit to the other implementations, but almost everything is going to support L&D. They have a higher focus on route reliability and efficiency, so they are more interested in your payment going through than, for example, it going through privately. So that they have a slightly different focus. They also have an authentication system that I mentioned, macaroons. Neutrino support, which is really cool. That's light Bitcoin nodes such that you can sync your L&D node without having to have a full copy of the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's nice. They also have multi-funded channels. It's a little bit different. They did it a little bit differently through PSBTs. Also multi-part payments. I was trying not to put anything in that everybody had, but I guess I did that with multi-part payments, the one feature that I didn't really know that much about. They also have peer swap support, which is cool. And autopilot, which is also node automation. I find it not so good. It made me angry, and I turned it off immediately. And it's usually defaulted to off as well. They do a lot of stuff with keysend and LNURL, so these are a lot of the cool tools that developers use to make things kind of easy to use in the user experience space. A couple notable services that L&D has. Lightning Labs. Sure. Yeah, it's a light Bitcoin client so typically when you're running a node, that's going to need a copy of the Bitcoin blockchain to look at, so that it can know when there's channels being opened and closed and so on and so forth. With Neutrino, it's sort of just instantly available. It's SP, is it SPV?
I think so.
So it's a light client, so it doesn't have to have a whole copy of the blockchain. So for example, if
Oh, CPF, okay.
okay. So like you don't have to download an entire copy of the blockchain to sync with the Lightning Network. There are some trade-offs. I think you're trusting basically the bootstrap nodes or something to that effect. I don't know a whole lot about Neutrino, but definitely check it out. It's a cool tool.
If it uses CPF, then it's an SPV fine.
So node has bit 158.
Cool. Lightning Labs makes some cool tools for L&D, Pool and Loop, which are liquidity, marketplace, and management, so that you can keep your channels balanced, especially if you're a routing operator. This kind of stuff's going to be really useful for you. They also have a ton of third-party stuff for channel maintenance, for rebalancing, for routing optimization, and for automation of all that stuff as well. Some examples: Balance of Satoshis, Lightning Jet, LNDG. There's a ton of tools out there for L&D. Let's talk about practicality of using these. So CLN and LND, as was mentioned earlier, are by far the kind of the two top dogs right now. They're the most actively developed, most advanced feature-wise, most widely supported, and they have the biggest communities around them. So if you have problems with these, if you want to run your own, you're going to get the most help for these two in particular. They're both available as plug-and-play services on like Bitcoin nodes, home servers, and some cloud providers will also offer nodes as a service to you. So you can easily kind of spin this up in the manner of your choosing, anything from on your own hardware to in the cloud, so on and so forth. And they're both supported by like a wide array of what we colloquially call wallets. But what's really the difference with a Lightning wallet, so to speak, is that it's really kind of a remote control for your node or for the node that it's talking to. And so, for example, you could have 3 of these interfaces pointed at your node, and they're all going to display the exact same information, right? So it's a little bit of a misnomer to call them a wallet because they're not holding your keys. They're not, they're not this atomic unit that you can, that is not going to have a copy of its data in these other wallets as well. So think of them as interfaces or remote controls for your node. And that's pretty much all I got. How much time did I take? Right on. Do I have time for a question or two? Right on.
Time for like 1 or 2 questions.
Does anybody have a quick question or 2 quick questions?
So I'm going to go back to Bolt 12, which is AMP coming with the fast payments. Sounds like it works similar to the the fast payments where you pay multiple, like where you have low liquidity in different nodes and it fills in the gaps. But this is also where you have like invoice programmability. Usually it's like a 1 hour time limit on an invoice lifetime. But thinking like scaling that out to make products, you want to have like price tag that has maybe like 1 year or you have a product cycle, life cycle, invoice. What do you have thoughts on that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think Bolt 12 is awesome. I mean, so for example, if you have like a static web page, or if you're making a flyer on a piece of paper, yeah, or like what we're doing, except instead of going to a website, you put a Bolt 12 offer on there, and it's reusable without like exposing a ton of information, so that people can pay that continuously as a reusable QR code. So that.
And that's on Liquid or on the Blockstream network, right?
Bolt 12 is a part of the Lightning spec. So this could be done on any Lightning implementation. It is currently available on the core Lightning implementation.
How interoperable are all the implementations right now?
Typically, they're pretty interoperable. So of the major last 3, you're going to be able to do things like open and close channels with each other most days, so on and so forth. Now, there are these are under pretty heavy active development. So for example, last month, I think it was, Core Lightning had a release where they changed a 4 years ago agreed upon default on one of their settings, and despite all of the parties to the Bolt spec having agreed upon this, one of the other teams had not actually changed that default, and therefore you could no longer make payments from Core Lightning to L&D. And so occasionally things are like in spec-ish, and like changes need to be made or patches have to come out, but it's it's just part of the process of huge teams with huge code bases working on complex software. That kind of stuff's going to happen. But for the most part, these are all, especially these top 3, they're all Bolt spec compliant. Some are a little stricter than others is all. But yeah. Well, good. Cool. Thanks so much. Appreciate you.